3.1 Introduction. A researcher wanted to carry out a study on organizational citizenship behavior and work motivation of employees in public and private sector banks in Chennai. Based on the objectives of the study, the method that was used by the researcher was quantitative method, as that was found to be appropriate for the conducting the study. The study was carried out using standardized psychological tests. We will discuss psychological testing in Unit 6. The data thus collected was statistically analyzed to make interpretations and generalizations. In the previous block, we discussed about psychological research and also focused on sampling and sampling techniques. The first unit is especially relevant as it introduced psychological research and thus serves as a foundation to the rest of the units in this course. In this unit, we will mainly discuss about the quantitative research. Research can be categorized into quantitative and qualitative research. Quantitative research mainly focuses on numbers, and there are various methods that can be discussed under this type of research. And Qualitative Research. 3.2 Introduction to Quantitative Research. Quantitative research deals with objective measurements and includes statistical or numerical analysis of data collected through polls, questionnaires, or surveys. The variables can be manipulated as well as controlled in quantitative research. Basically, the variables are manipulated to examine the cause-effect relationship, carry out comparative analysis or interventional analysis within a specified population. Quantitative research deals with numbers. It focuses more on convergent reasoning than on divergent reasoning, which means that the researcher tries to find out solutions to a research problem with help of standardized tools and not by creative ideas. It mainly focuses on quantifying relationships between variables. 3.3.1 Characteristics of quantitative method. The characteristics of quantitative research are as follows. 1. Clearly defined research questions. Based on the research problem, the researcher frames clearly defined research questions and the answers to these questions are sought objectively. 2. Representative sample. The researcher selects a sample from a specified population from which data is aimed to be collected. These samples are representative of the population, so that the results achieved can be generalized to the population. 3. Manipulation, control of variables. As mentioned before, the quantitative research deals with variables, and as per the requirement, the researcher manipulates, for example, increases or decreases, and even controls the extraneous, controlled variables that can affect the research study. 4. Structured and standardized tools used for data collection. Quantitative research deals with numbers, and the data is collected with the help of structured or standardized research instruments. The data is analyzed with help of empirical evidences. The data are collected in form of numbers and statistics, often arranged in tables, charts, figures, or other non-textual forms. 5. It is reliable and valid. Since the study is done under controlled observations involving scientific investigations, they can be replicated or repeated and provide similar results. The quantitative research is high on reliability. Further, as quantitative research involves the use of standard and structured instruments, which are variable specific, they are valid as well. 6. Generalizability. Since the quantitative research is done in a well-planned manner and are highly reliable as well as valid, the results obtained through the method can be generalized and can also be used to effectively predict results and infer causal relationships. 57. Quantitative research. 3.3.2 Strengths of quantitative method. It needs to be mentioned that quantitative research provides a framework to the researcher to find out relationships or conduct comparative analysis. It also enables a researcher to control the environment in order to collect the required data. Some of the strengths of the quantitative research can be mentioned as follows. It provides an opportunity to collect data from a larger sample and helps in conducting broader study as well as generalization of results to a larger population. It helps the researcher to attain reliable, valid, accurate, and objective results. It provides an opportunity to replicate and design similar studies. It provides an opportunity to conduct experiment under controlled environment and thus minimizes error variance. It uses close-ended and structured questions which provide responses free from personal biases. 3.2.3 Limitations of quantitative methods. Some of the limitations of quantitative research are as follows. It lacks contextual details. The research is limited to statistical approach and so lacks the grounds for the process of discovery. The closed-ended or structured questions might reflect a limited and incomplete information. Results might provide much narrower and sometimes superficial data set. The research does not involve interview or in-depth perception of individuals, so it does not provide complete insight of the real world. The research might not yield natural and original responses of individuals. Let us now discuss various methods of qualitative research. Experimental research. In an experimental research, the researcher can manipulate the predictor or independent variables as per the requirement of the research, to examine the cause-effect relationship. The researcher conducts the experiment under controlled environment, where the sample is divided into two groups, out of which one group is treated as experimental group, the group on which experimentation or manipulation is done, and the other is placed as a control group, the group on which no manipulations or treatments are given. The research is carried out under a high level of control that ensures that most of the extraneous variables are dealt with. You should know here that the independent or predictor variables are those variables which can be manipulated to see its effect on the dependent variables. For example, if you vary the intensity of light and temperature to examine its effect on performance of individuals, light and temperature here are the predictor variables and the performance becomes the dependent variable. A predictor variables therefore predicts its effect on dependent variable. Aronson et al., 2016, page 34, defined experimental method as the method in which the researcher randomly assigns participants to different conditions and ensures that these conditions are identical except for the independent variables, the one thought to have a causal effect on people's responses. The main characteristics of experimental method are: 1. It involves a systematic procedure including definition of the problem, research design, data collection and interpretation. 2. There is manipulation of one or more independent variable, S, to study its effect on dependent variable, S. 3. The study is carried out under controlled conditions. Thus, there is not much interference of extraneous variable, S. 4. It has high internal validity. It can be said that the change is independent. Variable, S, are as a result of independent variables and not extraneous variables. 5. It has lower external validity. As the study is carried out under controlled conditions, the results as such cannot be generalized to other situations. External validity is of two types: ecological validity and population validity. Ecological validity denotes whether generalization of the results can be carried out to other situations, and population validity denotes whether generalization of the results of the study carried out on a certain group of participants can be carried out to the population. 6. Sample can be selected using randomization. Experiments are often carried out in laboratory setup that provides adequate control. These are referred to as laboratory experiments. The laboratory experiment uses a standardized procedure, in which the participants are randomly allotted to each independent variable group. An example of laboratory experiment conducted in psychological research is the Milgram's experiment on obedience. The 59. Quantitative research laboratory experiment is advantageous because it involves standardized procedure. It can be replicated. Control of extraneous variables is possible and cause-effect relationship can be established. Though it is not aloof from disadvantages because it is conducted in artificial setting, which may lessen the ecological validity as the participant might not behave as they would have behaved in real-life setting. Further, there might be an influence of experimenter's bias. Demand characteristics may also act as confounding variable and affect the results. Non-experimental research. As the name reflects, this research lacks the required conditions of experimental research. In non-experimental research, the researcher cannot manipulate the independent variables, also because independent variables may have already occurred. For example, if we want to study the effect of abuse on mental health of children, in this case, the independent variable that is abuse has already occurred. The non-experimental research is high on external validity and can be generalized on a larger population. This method can also be used when the participants cannot be randomly assigned. For example, in a study to analyze whether a damage in midbrain affects the sleep of participants, participants cannot be randomly assigned due to the nature of the sample, though it can study causal relationships without manipulating the independent variables. It can also be used in exploratory researches, for example, a study to explore how efficiently child can be nurtured by single mothers. Some of the characteristics of non-experimental research are: 1. The independent variable cannot be manipulated. 2. There is low control. 3. Randomization cannot be used. 4. External validity is high. 5. internal validity is low. Field experiments. The field experiments are conducted in natural settings within the environment of the participants, for example, classroom. The experimenter can manipulate independent variables, though control may not be high. An example of field experiment done in the field of psychology is Holfing's hospital study on obedience. The advantages of field experiment are that the behavior reflected by participants in real-life setting is natural and spontaneous. The chances of demand characteristics affecting the results are low, and it has higher ecological validity than the laboratory experiment. The disadvantage of this research is that it has no control over extraneous variables which might affect the results. Also, as it is done in natural settings, it is difficult to replicate field experiments. Characteristics of field experiments are as follows. 1. The researcher can manipulate the independent variables. 2. Control is not high as the experiment is carried out in a natural settings. 3. External validity is higher compared to experimental research. 4. Randomization is not possible. Field studies. These researches are non-experimental in nature, as the researcher does not manipulate any variables, and research is carried out in natural settings. The data can be collected through face-to-face interviews, surveys, or direct observation. The data collected is specific to a particular issue, problem. The researcher carefully plans the procedure of research and ensures that the data is accurate, valid, and collected efficiently. The data is analyzed and interpreted accordingly. The advantages of field studies are that they can be used in studies where manipulation of independent variables is not possible. It is also useful in areas where manipulation of independent variables are not ethical. The disadvantages of this method are that there are possibilities of ethical challenges, like deception, involved in the study. There are more chances of sampling bias, and there may be influence of extraneous variables in the study. Some of the characteristics of field studies are: 1. The researcher cannot manipulate the independent variables. 2. The study is carried out in naturalistic setting. 3. Internal validity is low. 4. External validity is high. 5. Randomization is not possible. 4. Let us sum up. To summarize, in the present unit we mainly discussed about the quantitative research. Research can be categorized into quantitative and qualitative methods. The characteristics of quantitative research include clearly defined research questions, representative sample, manipulation, control of variables, structured and standardized tools used for data collection. Also, they are reliable and valid, and generalization is possible. The strengths and limitations of quantitative research were also discussed. Further, the unit also covered the methods of quantitative research, including experimental research, non-experimental research, laboratory experiments, field experiments, and field studies. In an experimental research, the researcher can manipulate the predictor or independent variables as per the requirement of the research to examine the cause-effect relationship. The researcher conducts the experiment within a controlled environment. In non-experimental research, the researcher cannot manipulate the independent variables. The non-experimental research is high on external validity and can be generalized on a larger population. The field experiments are conducted in natural setting within the environment of the participants. The experimenter can manipulate independent variables, but control is low. Field studies are non-experimental in nature, as the researcher cannot manipulate any variables, and study is carried out in a natural setting. Quantitative Research Unit 4 Qualitative Research Method. Researcher wanted to carry out a study on health-related beliefs and practices of a certain community. Based on the objectives of the study, she decided to employ interview and observation in order to collect data. The data thus collected by her was analyzed in order to develop better and deeper understanding about the health-related beliefs and practices of that particular community. The research method that is employed here by the researcher is qualitative research. In the previous unit, we focused on quantitative research, that we described as involving numerals. We also discussed various methods of quantitative research. In the present unit we will discuss about qualitative research. Qualitative research is non-numeral in nature and includes event description, interview, and evidences that are written or recorded. We will also focus on various methods of qualitative research. Further, mixed approach will also be focused on. Of qualitative research. Qualitative research can be defined as a type of scientific research that tries to bridge the gap of incomplete information, systematically collect evidence, produce findings, and thereby seek answer to a problem or question. It is widely used in collecting and understanding specific information about the behavior, opinion, values, and other social aspects of a particular community, culture, or population. An example of a qualitative research can be studying the concept of spiritual development amongst college students. David, 1995, had done such a study at a fairly conservative school. He actually tried to analyze whether there is uniformity or considerable diversity in people's understanding of spiritual development or not. Qualitative research helps in providing an in-depth knowledge regarding human behavior and tries to find out reasons behind decision-making tendencies of humans. Qualitative research can thus effectively capture aspects of our human nature. Qualitative research is less interested in explaining phenomena than in understanding them, and that is why it has relevance and implications in psychology. Qualitative research, thus, helps in attaining an in-depth knowledge about human nature, attitude, behavior, and experiences. It has several implications in the discipline of psychology, as it I. helps in textual description of experiences of people. E. helps in identifying and explaining social norms, roles of gender, socio-economic status, and so on. E. helps in understanding those behavioral phenomena which cannot be quantified. IV. helps in collecting data under natural situations. V. helps in determining those factors which are meaningful and are important to the respondents under study. The open-ended questions used in qualitative research provide a chance to unfold those facts which cannot be done with the help of close-ended questions. 4.2.1 History and Philosophy of Qualitative Research. Qualitative research method seems to have its roots in the disciplines of anthropology and sociology, as a method of investigation and survey. Although there was no universally accepted format earlier, researchers were using it to understand about culture and group adjustment at various places. However, later the social anthropologists like Malinowski, 1922, Mead, 1935, and the sociologists like Park and Burgess in 1925 started more focused approaches which lead to the shaping of qualitative research. The method was being used to study about the individuals at different settings, street corners, slums, and foreign places. The time frame of 1960s led to the emergence of theories and approaches like the grounded theory, Glaser and Strauss, 1967, and symbolic interactionist perspective, Becker et al., 1961. Later, several publications like Edited Volume by Filstead, 1970, Books on Ethnography by Spradley, 1979, 1980, contributed towards the development of qualitative methods of conducting research. 67. Subsequently, phenomenological approaches were also developed, such as phenomenological psychology by Georgi, 1985, and Kolesi, 1978. Later on, several studies and publications in the field originated. The Journal of Qualitative Sociology was published in 1978, and the International Journal of Qualitative Studies in Education was published in 1988. The Handbook of Qualitative Research was an edited book by Denzin and Lincoln in 1994. The term qualitative research was often interchangeably used as naturalistic inquiry, Lincoln and Guba, 1985, field research, Burgess, 1984, Delamont, 1992, case study approaches, Stake, 1995, Travers, 2001, interpretive research, Bryman, 2001. However, irrespective of the terms being used, qualitative research basically focuses on the lived experience, interaction, and language of human beings. Historical sketch of qualitative research in the field of psychology. The use of qualitative research was traced by Georgi, 2009, in the work of Wilhelm Wundt, Alfred Binet, the Würzburg School, John Watson, the Gestalt School, Wilhelm Stern, Jean Piaget, and Frederick Bartlett. The qualitative psychological research was recognized in 1980s and began to appear in professional journals with regularity only in 1990s, Rennie, Watson, and Montero, 2002. According to Danziger, 1983, 2001A, and 2001B, Wundt viewed his 10-volume Volker Psychology, 1900 to 1920, 1916, translated as social psychology, folk psychology, or cultural psychology, involving qualitative research on language, expressive movement, imagination, art, mythology, religion, and morality, as equally important to laboratory research in the science of psychology. Case history was a prevalent method being used to establish general knowledge. Freud as well used it in his research on psychopathology, Brewer and Freud, 1895. In late 60s, Georgi started using phenomenological assumptions and integrating qualitative procedures in traditional psychological experiments in order to gain more comprehensive knowledge of the psychology of learning. Georgi, 1967. He also applied the phenomenological methods to psychological topics outside the laboratory as well. Georgi, 1975. He further contributed by publishing the 4-volume series of Duquesne Studies in Phenomenological Psychology. Georgi et al. 1971, 1975, 1979, 1983. Further, several other eminent researchers also used the phenomenological analysis for psychology like Clark Mostakis, 1994, Max van Manen, 1990, and Jonathan Smith, Flowers, and Larkin, 2009. Barney Glaser and Anselm Strausses in 1967 formulated the grounded theory which played a role in sociology that was similar to Georgi's in psychology. From past few years the qualitative method is being integrated with other research methods. A section on qualitative inquiry has been included in APA's Division 5 and there is also publication of a new APA journal, Qualitative Psychology. There has also been an advent of the usage of mixed methods, research designs, Cresswell, Clausen, Piano Clark, and Clegg Smith, 2011, by psychologists where the qualitative method is being used along with quantitative method in researches. However, several types of qualitative methods like neo-positivism, neo-pragmatism, ethnography, case study, phenomenology are still not being used so frequently that may be due to lack of awareness or proper training. 2.2 Characteristics of qualitative research. The following are the characteristics of qualitative research. 1. Data leads to formation of theory. In a qualitative research, the researcher collects data by going to the participants, interacting with them and interviewing them at in-depth level. The data therefore collected is rich in information and becomes a basis for the formation of theories. It can be said that the qualitative research has a primacy of data. 2. Context-bound research. The qualitative research involves specific studies with reference to context, culture or society. Therefore, the research is more context-sensitive. The researchers study the events or day-to-day life actions on daily basis and they need to take into account all the happenings taking place in the particular situation. They have to exclude their personal biases and deeply involve themselves as participants of the event or situation. Thus, qualitative research is context-specific. 3. Involvement or immersion of researchers. As mentioned earlier, the qualitative research leads to complete involvement of the researchers in the natural settings. They need to engage actively in the activities to understand the phenomena or processes. Even before the process of data collection, they need to become familiar with the culture, society, situation which they are going to study. They should not be influenced by their perceptions, biases and thoughts and need to involve deeply into the research settings. Thus, the researchers deeply immerse themselves in the cultural settings in the qualitative method of research. 4. Researcher-participant relationship. The researcher in a qualitative research needs to be non-judgmental and she should not make any pre-assumptions, since they need to collect the original responses from the participants. The relationship between the researcher and participants of the research should lead to gain of relevant information which is free from biases. 5. Thick description. Geertz, 1973, mentioned that immersion of the researchers in the research setting will help the researchers to use thick description. Since the data collected from the participants involve the responses, experiences, interpretations, phenomena and rituals they follow, the description of the events, processes, phenomena etc., the interview and discussion with the participants should be thoroughly mentioned by the researcher. The thick description includes the information about facts, and theoretical as well as analytical description. Thus, qualitative research involves thick description, which includes the clear description of the culture, context, process and steps of research, which helps in construction of reality and analysis of research. 6. Data collection and data analysis occur simultaneously. The researcher immerses herself in the research settings to collect data through various ways like observation and interview, and she keeps on analyzing and interpreting the data simultaneously. 4.2.3 Difference between quantitative and qualitative research. In the previous unit we discussed about quantitative method, and in the present unit we discussed about qualitative research. Qualitative research. As the concept of qualitative research is now clear, we will discuss about its methods. Case study. With the help of this method, a case of an individual, group, event, institution or society is studied. It helps in providing an in-depth knowledge of the nature, process or phenomena of a specific case under study. Multiple methods of data collection are often used in case study research. Example, interviews, observation, documents, and questionnaires. The final report of the case study provides a rich, that is, vivid and detailed, and holistic, that is, describes the whole and its parts, description of the case and its context. A case study method can be used to study a peculiar event or a person suffering from a rare disorder or disease, for example. It can also be used to study certain institutions. Since case study is in-depth, it requires not only time but apt attention as well from the researcher. With the help of case study, a lot of information can be gathered. Certain case studies are also longitudinal in nature, where the study is carried out over a period of time. Some of the drawbacks of case study include: only few events, individuals can be studied, the sample is small or constitutes only one participant, and as an outcome of this the results obtained cannot be generalized. Further, it is also a time-consuming method that requires certain expertise on the part of the researcher. Ethnography. This approach mainly focuses on the study of a particular community. It is more of a kind of close field observation and basically tries to study a socio-cultural phenomena. This method mainly involves study of participants in their naturalistic environment. Observation is widely used in ethnography, and it is also less structured in nature. The researcher also plays an active role, and more often than not participant observation is used. Various other methods like interview, using documental sources are also employed in ethnography besides observation. One of the main advantages of ethnography is that primary data is collected firsthand and thus its validity is higher. Though its disadvantages include lack of generalization, inability to study cause and effect relationship, ineffective description of what is observed, and some ethical issues, for instance, when deception is used by the researcher, may also crop up while using this method. Further, employing ethnography is also complex, as the researcher may find it difficult to decide what to study and why to study it. Further, when the problem and objectives of the study have been decided, the researcher may find it difficult to get a smooth entry into that particular community group and form a positive rapport with the members of that community group. Exiting the community group can again pose a challenge due to deep relationship and bond that the researcher may develop with members of the community group. Ethnography does demand expertise on part of the researcher and is a time-consuming method. Grounded theory. Grounded theory was proposed by Glaser and Strauss in 1967. This qualitative method focuses on discovering and studies the relationship between an empirical investigation and theory. Thus, the data collection is carried out with an aim to promote development of theory from the data collected. Grounded theory and 71. Qualitative research discovery are the three main concepts of grounded theory besides constant comparison. Constant comparison denotes that data analysis in grounded theory is initiated the moment data is collected, and a comparison is carried out between the units of data or between the data units and probable explanations. In grounded theory, the data collected is analyzed systematically and interpreted in order to generate a report that can then lead to development of a theory. The steps involved in grounded theory include memorizing, sorting, and writing. Focus group. In this method of qualitative research, certain questions or issues are discussed by a group of participants. Focus groups can be structured or unstructured, and the group could be heterogeneous or homogeneous in nature. It may involve experts, referred to as Delphi group, who discuss certain important issues. For instance, health educators could discuss about certain health-related issues of a certain community, or could be individuals from certain community area discussing about certain issue, like women empowerment. The size of the group will depend on the objectives of the research, though an ideal size would be 12, and for Delphi groups it could be around 4 participants, and the participants may or may not know each other. One of the main advantages of this method is that a lot of information is gathered. Though, there are disadvantages as well, as there could issues related to encouraging the participants to contribute equally and actively. And though this method in a way gives more control to the participants, ethical issue of confidentiality cannot be maintained. Besides, there is also the problem of social desirability on part of the participants that can impact the outcome of the study. The researcher needs to play a role of coordinator in order to facilitate and promote effective discussion and also to avoid any conflict between the participants. She also needs to develop suitable rapport with the participants and provide proper information and instructions. Audio and visual aids can also be used to record the whole discussion that can later be analyzed. Phenomenology. In this method, the behavioral phenomena is explained with the help of conscious experience of events, without using any theory, calculations or assumptions from other disciplines. The concept can be best understood with the help of one of the studies that was done in which patients were asked to describe about caring and non-caring nurses in hospitals, Cresswell, 1998. The patients explained those nurses to be caring who show their existential presence and not mere their physical presence. The existential presence of caring nurses referred to the positive response showed by them to the patient's request. The relaxation, comfort and security that the client expresses both physically and mentally are an immediate and direct result of the client's stated and unstated needs being heard and responded to by the nurse. Content analysis. As the name suggests here, the content is analyzed. Krippendorf, 2004, page 3, defined content analysis as a systematic reading of texts and symbolic matter not necessarily from an author's or user's perspective. It can also be termed as technique that involves description of manifested content communication that is carried out in objective, systematic and quantitative manner. Berelson, 1952. Content analysis thus can be used in order to examine the varied issues ranging from social to cultural, values and events and so on from text, news, advertisements and other such sources. It can also be used in order to study and gain meaningful insights from various texts and documents. It involves a systematic evaluation of the texts and documents where the qualitative data is converted into quantitative data with the help of coding and thus valid interpretations can be made. Discourse analysis. Discourse analysis can be termed as a study that focuses on use of written and spoken language between individuals. Thus, it mainly involves analysis of interactions between individuals, texts, practices that are social in nature, face-to-face interactions, images, documents and so on. Though, discourse analysis will not only focus on the communication but also the context in which the communication takes place. The main steps in discourse analysis include identification of target, examination of significance and value of the data collected, analyses, summarization and interpretations of data. Though relevant information can be gained with the help of this method, it lacks reliability and validity. Further, subjectivity may also creep in. Check your approach. Method of research has recently gained much importance among research scholars. It refers to the integration of both quantitative and qualitative method in a single research. It provides a better understanding of viewpoints from the findings of both the research method. 4.4.1 Characteristics of mixed methods research. The characteristics of mixed methods research are mentioned as follows. It involves a rigorous procedure of collecting and analyzing data through quantitative as well as qualitative research. It is an integrated method which involves collection of data by both close-ended and open-ended questions. The method helps to understand a process, behavior or phenomena from various perspectives. For example, in order to understand the quality of service of an organization, the researcher needs to take the viewpoints of employees, clients, suppliers, owners and the end users. 73. Qualitative research. The method helps to provide an information-rich data. 4.4.2 Uses of mixed methods research. The uses of mixed methods researcher are 1. Validate findings. It helps in collection of data through both the ways at the same time. This parallel assessment of information and analysis of both qualitative and quantitative data helps in validating the findings and in generalization of the results. The method also helps cross-check the validity of both the research findings by comparing the data with each other. 2. Develop survey instruments. The method involves collection of data by both the research methods, which may help in the development of appropriate quantitative instruments that provide accurate measures. Further, the findings might also help develop and test a psychometric instrument that improves on existing measures. 3. Help in understanding community dynamics. The approach involves community participants in many quantitative and qualitative phases of research to bring about change. Mertens, 2009. The multiple phases deals with a single phenomenon. Therefore, the method helps in understanding community dynamics and to analyze, address and implement the required changes. 4. Reflects participants' point of view. Mixed methods provide an opportunity to study participants and ensure that study findings are grounded in participants' experiences. They provide flexibility and more details or a complete story in comparison to any single method being used. 5. Collects rich and comprehensive data. Mixed methods helps in collecting information by integrating quantitative and qualitative data, which also helps in minimizing errors and biases in the research findings. Hence, the data collected through mixed method is rich and comprehensive. 4.4.3 Limitations of mixed methods research. The limitation of the mixed methods research are as follows. 1. Involves complex evaluations. Mixed methods studies need careful planning and conduction of research. It needs to understand all the aspects of research and analyze data from both qualitative and quantitative perspectives. Further, integrating qualitative and quantitative data during analysis is also a challenging phase for many researchers. 2. Requires multiple expertise or experts. Since the data needs to be analyzed from both the perspectives, the researcher needs to be well trained in both the research methods, or she needs to involve experts from both the fields for better understanding and interpretation of the data. 3. Requires increased resources and time. The mixed methods require greater resources and time than those needed to conduct a single method of study. Qualitative research can be defined as a type of scientific research that tries to bridge the gap of incomplete information, systematically collect evidence, produce findings and thereby seek answer to a problem or question. It is widely used in collecting and understanding specific information about the behavior, opinion, values and other social aspects of a particular community, culture or population. Qualitative research, thus, helps in attaining an in-depth knowledge of human nature, attitude, behavior and experiences and has several implications in the discipline of psychology. Qualitative research method seems to have its roots in the disciplines of anthropology and sociology as a method of investigation survey. The use of qualitative research was traced by Georgi, 2009, in the work of Wilhelm Wundt, Alfred Binet, the Würzburg School, John Watson, the Gestalt School, Wilhelm Stern, Jean Piaget, and Frederick Bartlett. After tracing the historical developments of qualitative research, the characteristics of qualitative research were also discussed. Further, difference between quantitative research and qualitative research was also highlighted. The unit then focused on the methods of qualitative research including case study, ethnography, grounded theory, focus group and phenomenology, content analysis and qualitative research analysis. In the last section of the unit, mixed methods research was discussed with a focus on its characteristics, uses and limitations. Mixed methods research refers to the integration of both quantitative and qualitative methods in a single research, and it provides a better understanding of viewpoints from the findings of both the research methods, interview and case study method. Structure 5.0 5.1 Introduction. Sahil was pursuing his post-graduation in psychology, and as a part of an assignment in developmental psychology, he wanted to understand the way toddlers interact and communicate with each other during playtime. Instead of interviewing the parents, guardians or teachers, he felt that observing the toddlers in their naturalistic setup would provide him with accurate and first-hand information. Sheila was a research associate and wanted to study the health-related beliefs of Fisher folks in her state. She chose interview method as she felt that this method will help her gather more information about the health-related beliefs of the Fisher folks. Professor Shuhas Shetgovkar, Faculty, Discipline of Psychology, SAS, IGNOU, New Delhi. 82. Quantitative and Qualitative Research. Susan was a clinical psychologist, and as a part of certain projects she had to study the effect of cognitive behavior therapy on individuals with depression. She used case study approach in order to study the participants, as she felt that this method will provide her an opportunity to seek in-depth information. As we can see in the above 3 examples, 3 different methods of data collection have been mentioned, namely, observation, interview, and case study. All the 3 methods can be adequately used to collect in-depth information from the participants. As students of psychology, it is important that we understand these methods, as that will help us make decisions about which methods to use when we carry out research. In the present unit, thus, we will discuss these 3 methods, and in the next unit, we will discuss about psychological tests that are used by researchers to collect data from the participants. 5.2 Observation. We know that young children learn a lot through observation, and as adults as well we indulge in observation. We observe people, events, phenomenon, etc., and then make interpretations about the same. The observation that we will discuss in this section is similar, though, it is more systematic in nature and is carried out keeping in mind the objectives of a research. Observation can be described as a process of data collection in which the units, events, phenomena, individuals witnessed firsthand. A researcher, for example, can observe employees at work, children interacting with each other, people belonging to certain community, and so on. This is one of the prominent methods that is used to collect data in qualitative research. According to Kurlinger, 1995, there are 2 modes with regard to observation. One is where we directly observe persons as they behave or events, for example, employees working in this work setup, and the other is where we seek information from persons about their or others' behavior by asking questions. For example, parent can be asked about their child's behavior at home. Observation can be carried out either in a naturalistic setup or it can be carried out in a laboratory or a clinical setup. The benefits of naturalistic situation are in a way high, as the behavior of individuals in their natural setup can be studied. In such a case there is no manipulation or control of any variables. For example, individuals can be observed in shopping centers, in malls, or at a railway station. Even animals can be observed using naturalistic observation. Though, when a researcher needs to manipulate an independent variable or needs to control effect of certain extraneous variables, then observation can be carried out in an artificial situation like a laboratory. This can also be done using one-way mirror. To take an example, behavior of children during playtime can be studied in presence and absence of an adult. Observer plays an immensely important role in observation, as she needs to observe and record events and details. Various aids can be used to carry out observation. That includes the following: checklist. Very often based on the domain of observation, a checklist is created that can then be used while carrying out observation. This can be termed as a 83. Observation, interview, and case study. Tool for structured observation, discussed later in this section. Such a checklist could include demographic as well as behavioral items, statements. Rating scales. Rating scales can also be used during observation. These scales are more specific compared to checklist. These scales include lesser dimensions and are also comparatively well defined. Thus, statement and items will be marked based on a rating scale. Video recordings. Observations can also be video recorded so that they can be referred to later on. Such recordings will ensure that no information is missed out by the researcher, observer. Though, prior permission needs to be taken from the participants with assurance of confidentiality. In which case spontaneity can get affected and social desirability may also occur on the part of the participants. Besides the above, observers may also use one-way mirror, where the observer can see the participants, but the participants cannot see the observer. Television cameras could also be used, where a camera is placed in the room where the individuals are interacting or where the event is taking place, and the observer can observe the individuals' events through a television, sitting in another room. 5.2.1 Types of observation. There are various types of observation. These are discussed as follows. 1. Participant observation. As the name suggests, in participant observation, the observer participates along with other participants in the activities, events, phenomena being studied so that she is able to gather first-hand information and interpret it effectively. Thus, the researcher is actively involved in activities carried out by the participants. This type of observation is often used by social anthropologists and can be used to study tribal groups. Majumdar, 2015. To take an example, if the researcher is studying rituals and practices of certain community during a festival, then she will actively participate in the same. As the researcher is actively involved, she is able to gather relevant information about the day-to-day activities, rituals, practices, etc. of the community group. Though, seeking entry to the group could pose a challenge besides creating rapport with the community group. Some of the advantages of this method include opportunity to observe the behavior of the individuals in a natural setup, an opportunity to build rapport and closeness with the community group members that enables the researcher to collect in-depth information and develop deeper understanding. Further, as the researcher is actually participating, she gets an original perspective about the events, phenomena, rituals, etc. To mention some of the disadvantages, this method could be very time-consuming. Also, exiting the community group could be a challenge as the researcher forms a bond with the participants. Another disadvantage of this type is that if the participants are aware about the observer, then their behavior and interaction may get affected as they may not be spontaneous. Though, to deal with this, deception can be used where the participants are not aware that they are being studied. But this can give rise to certain ethical issues, and due care needs to be taken to protect the privacy and rights of the participants. The researcher also needs to be careful in noting down the observations and interpreting them. These need to be done as objectively as possible to avoid any bias and subjective interpretations. Also, the researcher needs to be adequately trained. 84. Quantitative and qualitative research. And skilled to carry out effective observations. She also needs to carry out a background study about the community group so that she is able to study the events, phenomena, practices, etc. from right perspective. 2. Non-participant observation. Though a lot of first-hand information can be gathered with the help of participant observation, this type of observation has numerous challenges and problems. One way to deal with these challenges and problems would be by employing non-participant observation. In this, the observer will not participate along with the participants in the activities, events, phenomena being studied. Thus, the observer will observe the participants passively. An example of non-participant observation would be observing children's interaction during playtime using a one-way mirror or television camera. Some of the advantages of this type include objectivity and ability to be neutral. As the researcher is not participating, her perspective and interpretation can be more objective, also because she may not be emotionally involved, which can happen in participatory observation. Thus, her views would not be biased or subjective. The researcher is also more likely to be impartial as compared to participant observation. The participants may also share more information as they may not mind sharing the same with a stranger rather than a person who is familiar, as in case of participant observation. There are disadvantages to this method as well. Though there is greater objectivity compared to the participant observation, subjectivity on the part of observer, researcher cannot be ruled out as she will ultimately interpret the behavior based on what she sees and perceives. She may also not be in position to ask any questions to seek clarification. Also, the observation is not complete as the interaction behavior is observed during certain time period, and the researcher will observe behavior, event that is happening in front of her at that moment. The setup is artificial and the participant are mostly aware that they are being observed, thus, the spontaneity can get affected and social desirability can also creep in. 3. Structured observation. Structured observation is denoted by a careful definition of units to be observed, a clear delineation as to what a person or group to be the object of observation, what information constitutes the domain of observation, the size of the group and the selection principle thereof, the standardized conditions of observation, Majumdar, 2015, page 226. From this definition, it is clear that the observer has clear guidelines about what to observe. This in a way is helpful as the observer is prepared and knows what exactly she needs to observe. This type adequately guides the observation process, though it is not as flexible as unstructured observation. 4. Unstructured observation. In this observation, the guidelines and principles as stated under structured observation are not available. Though the structured observation could be more systematic, Unstructured observation provides a kind of freedom to observe the units, events, individuals, phenomena and so on without the pressure of any conceptual guidelines or framework. Majumdar, 2015. It also needs to be noted that more often than not, an observation is semi-structured, that is a combination of structured and unstructured observation is employed. 85. Observation, interview and case study. 5.2.2 Advantages of observation. The following are some of the advantages of observation. 1. This is one of the best methods of obtaining data in a naturalistic setup. 2. It is helpful when participants are not in position to adequately, verbally, answer the questions. For example, young children may not be able to answer certain questions. 3. First-hand information can be obtained as methods like interview and so on may not be as reliable as observation. 4. When a method like interview is used, the individuals may not reveal all the information, but with the help of observation much more information can be obtained. 5. It can help in verification of information provided by the participants. 5.2.3 Limitations of observation. The following are some of the limitations of observation. 1. Subjectivity can creep in during data collection and interpretation. 2. The characteristics of the observer like his, her attitudes, beliefs and even past experiences can have an impact on his, her perception of the individuals, events, phenomena and so on. 3. The researcher may end up with vast information and may not be able to interpret it adequately. 4. The observation is in the present context and no information about past can be collected without using certain methods like interview. 5. Yet another problem is related to the validity and reliability of observation. According to Kurlinger, 1995, page 488, the interpretive burden that the researcher is subjected to could lead to lower validity. Further, reliability is also significant in this context. Reliability here is denoted by agreement amongst the observers. Thus, using videotapes and records can help achieve a higher reliability, though if such an agreement is due to chance, for example, then the reliability may suffer. Observation is thus an effective method of data collection, but we need to remember that the researcher needs to be not only skilled and sensitive but also possess necessary expertise. She also needs to be cautious and keep in mind the ethical issues while carrying out observation so that the rights of the participants are protected and they are not subjected to any harm. 5.3 Interview. This is one of the most commonly used methods of data collection. Various methods of data collection can be categorized based on the extent to which they are direct. For instance, one way data can be collected is by asking questions to the participants and another way would be by using projective techniques like Rorschach inkblot series and so on. Interview can be termed as a direct method that may help in gathering relevant information directly from the participants. Though, it is possible that the participants are not able to or not willing to reveal certain information, in which case a direct method like interview will not work. Kurlinger, 1995, page 441, described interview as a face-to-face interpersonal role situation in which one person, the interviewer, asks a person being interviewed, the respondent, questions designed to obtain answers pertinent to research problem. The key points in this definition are that there are two main individuals involved, interviewer and interviewee, who are involved in a face-to-face interaction. And during this interaction, the interviewer will ask certain questions to the interviewee to elicit responses. One of the main aspects of the interview is the interview schedule. Interview schedule is nothing but questions that the interviewer has to ask as well as certain guidelines with regard to how the interviewer is expected to proceed with the interview. Preparing an interview schedule is a challenge and a lot of planning and work is required. While preparing an interview schedule, one needs to be sure that the sentences are specific and clear and lack words with double meaning or ambiguous words. Though interview schedules are costly and are time-consuming affair, the amount of information that can be obtained with the help of interview schedule is large. Before preparing an interview schedule, suitable background information needs to be collected about the focus of research and research problem. An interview schedule will mainly constitute identification information or face sheet, census type information and problem information. Kurlinger, 1995, page 441. Identification information is mainly required so as to be able to identify the schedule. The census type information is related to the socio-demographic information including age, gender, education, occupation, marital status, 87. Observation, interview and case study. Economic status and so on, and the problem information includes questions pertaining to the research problem for which the responses from the interviewee are elicited. The items in the interview schedule could be open-ended or close-ended. In open-ended items, a frame is provided for the answer, but otherwise the interviewee has freedom to answer the way she wants to. In close-ended items, certain fixed alternatives are provided from which the interviewee has to select, thus limiting the flexibility of answers. In certain cases, scales are also used in interview schedule where responses can be provided in terms of degree of agreement or disagreement. For example, agree, undecided, disagree or frequently, sometimes, rarely, never. The researcher or the interviewer needs to carefully decide about what type of items she wants in her interview schedule based on the research problem. While carrying out interview, audio and video recording can be carried out with due permission of the interviewees. Care needs to be taken while framing the questions, and the following needs to be ensured. The question is with focuses on the research problem. It is not vague and lacks any ambiguity. A question needs to elicit an answer and should not elicit a question. Background information needs to be obtained about the study so that the researcher or interviewer is sure that the respondents will have answers to questions asked, and also to ensure that the possibility of resistance to the question on part of the interviewees will be low or negligible. A question that may elicit a response that is influenced by social desirability needs to be avoided. 5.3.1 Types of interview can be categorized as follows. 1. Structured interview. This is also referred to as standardized interview. This type is standardized, as the name suggests, and includes predefined questions that are sequenced in certain predefined order and also worded in certain way. Thus, there is not much freedom to the interviewer to make any changes to the questions asked. The interview schedules for such an interview are prepared carefully well in advance and with much deliberations. And it is prepared with a focus on the research problem. Though one disadvantage could be that preparing such an interview schedule is an exhaustive and time-consuming process, and there is not much scope for the researcher to make many modifications. 2. Unstructured interview. Also termed as unstandardized interview. This type of interview is more flexible, and as such questions are not predetermined, and the interviewer has full freedom to ask the questions in the way and sequence that she wants to. This in a way provides the necessary freedom to the interviewer to make any modifications as per the demand of the situation. 3. Semi-structured interview. Such an interview is a combination of structured and unstructured interview. There will be an interview schedule that is predetermined, but the interviewer has full freedom to modify and make changes in it. 88. Quantitative and Qualitative Research. 5.3.2 Advantages of Interview 1. A lot of relevant, in-depth and a large amount of information can be collected with the help of this method. 2. This method is suitable to collect data regarding certain serious and complex issues that could even evoke emotional reactions. 3. This method is flexible and can be used with varied respondents from varied backgrounds. 4. Since it is face-to-face, the interviewer also has an advantage of observing the nonverbal behavior of the interviewee. Certain spontaneous reactions of the interviewee can also be recorded. 5. It is possible for the interviewer to explain certain questions or words to the interviewee or clarify any doubts, thus increasing the likelihood of eliciting appropriate responses. 6. Certain participants may display resistance in replying, but with suitable skills and rapport it is possible for interviewer to elicit responses from such participants. 7. It is comparatively easy for the interviewer to notice if the interviewee is faking or providing genuine responses. 5.3.3 Limitations of Interview 1. Preparing a suitable and adequate interview schedule is a task in itself, and not only hard work and time but certain level of expertise and skills are also required. 2. Even interviewing requires necessary expertise and skills. 3. It is time-consuming and is not cost-effective. 4. It may be difficult to analyze and interpret the responses to the open-ended questions. 5. Subjectivity may creep in. 6. Reliability and validity could be low. 7. Influence of social desirability cannot be ruled out. Check. 5.4 Case study. Case study can be described as an approach that helps in obtaining information about the unit from varied perspectives. Case study thus helps obtain in-depth information about the unit. Case study can be used to study not only individuals, but organizations, institutions, events, and so on. Often multiple methods of data collection including interview and observation are used in case study to collect information about the unit. In psychology, case study is frequently used in varied setups including clinical